right, so let's start out so I don't mess up your name or anything else, because I'm terrible with that. I know you're Gurpreet.
Yes. Hi, Shane.
Yeah, and it's at the end of the work shift for me, so I'm absolutely friggin' bagged out. We've been in the house here for 4 days, arguing back and forth. And my role as the whip, I'm kind of running around like you, honestly, with your distillery and everything, going like a one-arm paper hanger. But maybe give a little introduction to who you are, what you've been up to, and then we'll just go from there. This is a conversation, and it's what matters to you.
All right, what matters to me?
Yeah.
So Gurpreet Ranu, owner, head distiller at Anohka Distillery. Just had a baby a few months ago.
No kidding.
That's what matters.
Boy,
probably.
girl?
If you're a little girl.
Little girl, right?
So if you want to talk about what matters most to me right now, it's probably my little 3-month-old at home.
Is she sleeping through the night yet, or?
No, but I'm not really much help at night, so I sleep through the night no matter what. So my wife, she's a saint, and so she's not sleeping through the night, and neither is my wife. So.
Well, the first time I wish, buddies and everything else, like I've got 4 kids too. They're all grown up now, and we went through that stage. But I wish my friends would have told me how sleep deprived you are.
Yeah.
Like, you can party it up in college, you can do all those things, you can be an animal. And once you have your first kid that doesn't sleep through the night, I literally fell asleep in the restroom one time, my head on the back at home, and like this, it was, Yeah, no, I get that. So by the third, though, I mean, you become pretty immune to a lot of the stuff, right? Like, you're used to being sleep deprived, right? Yeah.
And the first one was terrible. Like, I have scars in my shins because I kept on running into things around the house because I was so sleep deprived trying to put this baby to sleep. And now I'm just accustomed to not sleeping. So
it gets there. It's a good training skill.
Yeah.
So 3 kids.
Yeah.
New little one, 3 months, which is awesome. And you're running this business, and you gave me a call a couple of weeks ago. And now the other thing that was pretty neat. So I got to know you over the last couple of years. Obviously, you're out in what I call God's country, the constituency there in Laxton and Parkland. This neat building's going up. People are telling me about it. I got to drop in. So I drop into this place. We finally get a chance to meet, and you're not what I would have expected.
Yeah. Like, what did you expect?
Well, I'm seeing this operation, and it's like, okay, the guy has a physics degree. He's a lawyer, and now he's putting up a distillery outside of Edmonton, which is a good choice, by the way, out in that area. But, like, how does that happen?
Again, an extremely supportive wife who probably should know better than to be supportive of me by now. But how does that happen? It's kind of crazy because I used to work not far from here, just up the hill here, right across the street from the Mark. I used to work at a law firm there, and then worked in Manulife for a while. So yeah, I mean, it was a very, very different life. My wife married a lawyer, and now her husband is a distiller and a farmer. I come home covered in barley. I'm covered in grain right now as we sit here.
You were just literally batching.
I was just making whiskey. Yeah, I dropped everything and ran as soon as I saw the time. And but yeah, how did that happen? I don't know how that happened. I think.
Well, from the story I remember, and maybe I've been telling the wrong story, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. It was kind of like you were talking about you're whining and dining some of your clients, the corporate lawyer. You're looking at the ingredients in this really, expensive bottle of scotch and
100%.
going, why aren't we doing this here? We have all this stuff here.
That is really the genesis of it all. Is being a pretentious lawyer who drank too much, right? And if you're a pretentious person, right, then you're going to drink fancy things, right? And for me, that fancy thing was scotch, and so single malt whiskey. Though I fell in love with the stuff because you get a well-made single malt whiskey. I'd put that up against any style of whiskey in the world. And I don't think there's another style of whiskey that could hold a candle to a well-made single malt whiskey, right? There's a lot of, okay whiskey out there, but if you get an excellent single malt whiskey, I don't think there's a bourbon or a Irish whiskey or other style of whiskey that could really hold a candle to it. Although there's a lot of single malt from Ireland. I should correct myself there. But so the falling in love with this thing, you realize, it's made with barley, water, yeast. And I'm like, shit, we live in Alberta. right? Like we have all of this stuff right here. And at the time that this idea started to really take hold, I was working in Manulife. We were on the 25th floor, and when you're up there, you can see the city limits, and you see just endless acres of farmland, right?
Yep.
And then sitting in my office, I did a quick Google search, and turns out we grow in Alberta more barley than any country in the Western Hemisphere. We grow 3 times as much barley as Scotland in Alberta by itself, and we export the lion's share of it, unfortunately. We use some here domestically to feed cattle and swine, and that's fine. But the cattle and swine aren't eating. We grow over 5 million tons of this stuff, right? And so the rest of it gets exported around the world. And if you're from Alberta, you should be upset about all this when you start looking into the stats, and the stats should upset everyone. Including our MLA. You should be upset, Shane, because you look at the number, and so we grow 5 million tons of barley here. We export, all of Canada only exports about 8 million tons, just over 8 million tons, right? So the lion's share is coming out of here.
Yep.
And you look at these producers around the world. So Sapporo beer, right?
Yep.
They have their own variety of barley that they bred to grow in the perfect barley growing conditions. Do you know where it all grows?
Don't.
East of Edmonton.
No kidding.
Yeah. And then have you heard of Asahi?
Yes.
Another Japanese beer?
Yeah.
Well, guess where all their barley comes from? Comes out of a little town called Alex, east of Red Deer. Okay. Then you look at a place like Jack Daniels, for example, right? I think 12 to 13% of the mash bill for Jack Daniels is barley. Where does that barley come from? Comes out of Calgary, right?
No kidding.
And so we ship it out by rail car, right? Other people get it. They value add to it, and they sell it back to us. And we happily buy this stuff, and we think it's exotic, but it's made with our inputs, right? And the fact that we don't value add to it here should drive everybody a little bit batty. And when you look at the economic opportunity, and I don't look at it as an economic opportunity, I look at it as a loss, because you look at it and you realize, so we take a certain amount of barley. Let's say we take $1 of barley exports. When you do the math, so we export it, raw ingredient, we get $1, right? For that $1 of barley, do you know what the Scots turn it into, the same volume? They turn it into $140.
Nice.
Okay? And so, you've got this industry in Scotland that brings in $5.5 billion, and they grow a third of the amount of barley we do. All right? Surely to God, we can compete with them. All
So
right?
was this the pitch you put on your wife?
That was the pitch. That was the pitch. But I lost that argument because she made a good point, and the point she made is she's like, all right, that's fine, right? But you're trained as a lawyer,
yeah,
right? What if you're terrible at making whiskey? And so that was and so she won that argument. But
you didn't stop there.
No. I had to prove to her that I could make whiskey. So
not only pretentious, but now you've got a challenge. So
yeah. I usually don't take no for an answer.
Yeah.
So I think that's how this all kind of ended up happening. So I was like, all right, so what's the issue? Well, what if you're terrible at it? So I had to prove to her that I wasn't terrible at it. And so we may or may not have had a pilot distillery, which may or may not have been in my dad's backyard in Edmonton. For a couple of years before, the actual distillery opened.
Was this before or after you went to the Jedi Academy of Brewing?
We set everything up first.
Okay.
And my first batch was terrible, right? And my wife essentially said, "Told you so," right?
That's
right?
You can't let
so,
that.
I watched a bunch of YouTube videos and I read some stuff online. I was like, it's 3 ingredients, and I'm pretentious, so I'm quite overconfident in my skills. And I was like, gosh, surely I can figure out how to make this. And I tried making my first batch of whiskey, and it was terrible. And the more I got into it, the more I realized I didn't know. And then, you taste it, and it has all these off flavors, and you're trying to figure out what the heck you did wrong. And if you don't understand the science behind it, how the heck do you ever fix it? Yeah. And so then, we head off. I looked into it, and it turns out, anybody who's anybody in the distilling industry anywhere in the world, whether, you know, they're the head of JP Weiser's right now, for example, or Black Velvet down in Lethbridge, or any, you know, distillery in Scotland, South Africa, anywhere in the world. The top distillers in the world all have one thing in common, and that's that they studied brewing and distilling at Heriot-Watt University in Scotland. So that was the place to go. So I registered for my Master's of Science and kind of got to work learning how to make whiskey properly and figure out what I did wrong. And, you know, I did everything wrong. And if there's anybody out there who wants to learn how to make whiskey, YouTube and online forums are a terrible place to learn, right? And you know, and it turns out, like, talking to other craft distillers who don't have formal training probably isn't the greatest place to go, because maybe what they're making works for them, but like it's not universally applicable to a different environment. And so understanding the actual science, there's only a few programs in the world where you can actually learn the science of brewing and distilling, and Heriot-Watt is one of them.
Nice. Yeah. Well, and there's a couple, you know, high notes, not only the pitch to the wife, but yeah, it works with your MLA for sure.
Yeah.
Because the interesting thing around that was, you know, on the economic corridor, so I'm always talking about value add and what we can do, and it comes down to a lot of supply chain and logistics too. It drives me bonkers that we bulk out all of our stuff and pay a premium coming back, you know, not only on the exchange rates and everything else, so you had me there. The other thing is we're really strong in it, you know, going on wine tours in BC or down in Ontario. Okay, great. They've got an entire industry that has that value add in the agri-food side and that all that experience. And I'm sitting here looking at this, okay, we can do beer. Excellent. We've been doing that in the microbrewing. Distilling now is coming on. Why am I not doing that? And your location is absolutely gorgeous. It was like you had that in the back of your mind. At least to me, it looks like it. You've got a nice venue. You've got a place where people can come and visit and do those things. You got the restaurant sides. You got the tasting experience, and it becomes an experience.
So the Okanagan was actually, like, you know, that was the inspiration for the kind of setup that we wanted to build out there. When, you know, the year previous I had gone for some wine tours with some family in BC, and you know, I was like, well, this is beautiful. We don't have vineyards, but we have beautiful barley fields, right? We can grow our own grain. And so that was, I mean, that's a large part of how we ended up in Parkland County is, well, the zoning was a part of it.
Open for business type idea.
Exactly. Yeah. And you know, the farm that we ended up buying, you know, belonged to a family that had historically grown barley there as well. So we knew that it was good barley growing conditions. Yeah. We talked to, you know, it turns out if you want to know about the agricultural, like, value of land, or just about agriculture in an area, best place, your best resource is actually the local seed cleaning plant. So I called the Stony Plain seed cleaning plant. I said, hey, look, we're looking at this land. Who are the folks who are really good at their job at growing grain in this area? And it turns out it was our neighbor, Dave Harashko. And I talked to him in advance and met with him and said, look, this is what our plan is. This is what we want to seed. Well, how do you think it'll go? And he said, oh, it'll be great. And, you know, and kind of gave us the confidence to kind of move forward. And so, you know, we've got these beautiful rolling hills, 110 acres, grow our own barley. The distillery is literally in the middle of our field where we grow our grain. You know, and so you're literally steps away from the field where we grow the barley that we turn into whiskey. And so nice. I think, you know, that is kind of where we saw we could kind of mirror what's happening in the Okanagan, but, you know, we have grain, right? And it's beautiful too, you know.
Well, and, you know, we've had some high profile guests out there too, and I'll get to that in a bit as well. So you kind of had that thing that was taking place, and that makes a ton of sense. The other thing that I really liked about, you know, talking with you is you're willing to share this knowledge and try to replicate it. And it was more than just, here's my jug of whiskey, and I'm going to say that, you know, the lowbrow type thing. Here's my jug of whiskey, and oh, by the way, I need. It wasn't that. It was, here's a high value product. Here's the reason why we need to wrap around this industry. We've got a $5 billion, you know, industry we're not even paying attention to potentially. We've got all the elements. You've got the food side of it, the ag side, the logistics side of it.
Tourism.
And then you were talking the tourism side, but then moreover, then coming back to the education piece, you were saying that we have education components that we're already having post-secondary that's really good for brewing beer, but here's all the other things that we can wrap around it. talk a bit about that. Like, how do I get the Jedi Academy feel here? Do I start sending people there to train them? Do we start looking at tying universities and technical colleges together, or how do we do that?
Olds has a great program, but they built that program around brewing. Yeah. And so I've interviewed their graduates, and so the knowledge on the distilling side isn't as strong from my experience. Maybe I just had poor applicants, but the Olds College is there. Their focus is beer. I think you could probably build out a decent curriculum for distilling, but really it's there's got to be there's got to be like a passion for excellence too, right? And because like you can make mediocre whiskey real easy. That's not hard, right?
People do it by the train carload.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And so it's not hard to make mediocre whiskey, but like I don't know how that program gets I don't know, that emphasis on excellence. So I mean, you'll get different candidates if it's a master's program. I'm just saying, like if it's a master's of science program, you're going to get different candidates, right?
People have to take it serious as a master's of science program. I mean, you said that in the onset. It's serious.
It is serious, and that's why, like Harriet Watt exists, and there already is this program. And you can take it remotely too, right? Like you don't have to actually leave the province to do it. And so you can do it remotely. And so that program already exists. It already has like you have to have a bachelor's of science before you can apply for your master's. I mean, the program exists. So I don't know if we need to replicate the educational component necessarily here in the province. Because even if you look at, Eau Claire, I think they have 2 or 3 graduates from Harriet Watt, working at Eau Claire Distillery. So, I mean, there is a way to get that education without having to invest in the resources. Because that's...
Well, and one of the things that we do really well, and I'm learning more as an MLA, bouncing around too with the corridors model is also tying in universities for technical proficiency. So basically you've got a sister university, and then you share both the students and then the resources back and forth. So you don't have to compete against them. You just marry those two up. Yeah. And then what I would love to see is some farm kids or otherwise, or folks from the energy sector or anyway, or, they've got their Bachelor of Science, whatever discipline. But to think this is literally another item that they could tie into. Like I would love to get our own feeder camp for the Jedi Academy for distilling and marry that up.
I mean, and they all actually offer like a diploma program as well. Yeah. So, I mean, there are options. And so I don't know if there's a way to tie in with them, but like they have the leading experts, leading researchers in the world are working at Harriet Watt.
Well, if Mr. Sawney watches any of this, I'm going to be talking to you, Minister, to tie in that back in. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm not sure if I'm not sure how that would work on.
Let your MLA take that away. I'll figure that out. So there's the pipeline. The other element that I thought was really cool with your facility, and it had a bit of a unique Alberta flair to it. So when you were telling me about the process of the caramelization, where you actually need a direct heat, I mean, some of the best ones did that in the world. Everyone's going steam because it's easy. Yeah. You being a perfectionist, which I 100% appreciate, wanted that authenticity. So tell us about how you came to setting up your production facility. Like it was, I don't know how else to say it. It was the distillery.
Everything we did was stupid, right? Like nothing we did was smart, right? Like but like we had. Our focus was singular, and our focus was, you were at our grand opening, right, Shane?
I think you were.
So. Yeah. And so I said it at the grand opening. I said, look, my plan here is we're going to make some of the best whiskey on the world, and I'm going to put Parkland County on the map. And that was kind of my opening speech.
Your mission statement.
That was my mission statement. And that was my goal. My goal was not to make a mediocre whiskey. My goal wasn't to make an okay whiskey. And so we wanted to. What was really cool about having the educational component is that it allowed me to understand what it would take to make something that would separate itself from everybody else. And so what we did is we basically married some of like the most cutting edge tech that you possibly could get into a craft distillery with some of the most old school, old world techniques. And so everything kind of works together, right? And none of it works on its own, right? And but if you can do all of it, and that's a really cool thing about being in Alberta and being in Canada, is that, you know, we're not held back by 300 years of tradition. We can do whatever we want, right? Like, we don't have, just because, you know, we're doing one part of the distillery old school doesn't mean that we have to do everything old school, because, you know, doing old school inefficient things that you know, where technology has moved things to a place where you can achieve the exact same result, in fact, better results with new tech. Why wouldn't we use that, right? So we could marry everything. So that was that. So, I mean, what we did is, let's start off with how we ended up, you know, choosing all of our systems. It started off because we were on a well, right? And it started off because we're on a well because we have to reduce our water consumption, because we have to apply for a license, right, for our water consumption. So we needed to reduce our water consumption by significantly compared to a normal distillery, right? If you're hooked up to city water, they literally waste tens of thousands of liters of water every day, right? And I can't afford to do that.
Well, and there's another thing too, and obviously we're going to drought conditions, but there was my phone won't stop ringing here. I got to turn that off. I apologize. There was a senator from Nebraska, and he said it quite well, and I think it was a Mark Twain quote, because we're talking the bigger picture in the basins when it comes to water. And he says, whiskey's for drinking and water's going to be for fighting over. So the fact that you're already inherently doing this to make whiskey, not lost on me. So the fact you're doing that makes a ton of sense. And other distillers, there's your challenge. Start reducing your water intake. Exactly. We need it to grow stuff and feed people and water them too. Exactly.
And so our water consumption is actually like on par with what is permitted for a country residence. So like our water consumption is shockingly low for what we're doing. That's
surprising, actually. Seeing your facility, that's wild.
And so, you know, what we did is we're like, all right, we're going to reduce our water consumption. And so we ended up getting like the super high tech brewing system from Belgium. We're the first and only distillery in the country to have it. And what it lets us do is actually, when you use it in its typical format, you reduce your water consumption by like 30% and energy consumption. We pushed it to its absolute limit. So we're probably reducing our water consumption by closer to like 40% compared to an average brewery. That's just in the brewing process. And then we ended up, when you reduce your water consumption, what happens to the sugar concentration in the so we're extracting basically sugar from the grain, right? Okay. So when we're extracting sugar from the grain, if you reduce your water consumption by that much, what happens to the sugar concentration in the water that you take out of it? It goes way up. Yep. And so the Scotch Whisky Research Institute knows that the future is water reduction, right? Water consumption reduction. Okay. So they've been breeding yeast strains that can deal with this high sugar concentration and actually make more flavor, more of the fruit flavor, more basically concentrated flavor than you could possibly ever imagine with a typical yeast strain. And all it needs is to, you reduce your water consumption, your sugar concentration goes up, and you create this like super flavorful, we call it wash, right? Okay. Then now we have the super concentrated thing going into the still, and then you hit that with a giant fire, right, to heat it. Now this is where we go old school, and so everybody else is using steam, right? And steam is great because your equipment lasts forever. The chance of blowing yourself up is significantly lower than it is at our facility. And
it's safe, folks. I've been there. It's okay. Yeah. We'll get to that part.
Yeah. But but fire is incredible in what it can do. And so now we have this super concentrated liquid coming in, and we're hitting it with this direct flame. And what fire does is it drives a bunch of chemical reactions that you can't get at low heat. So everybody else is using steam, typically. And so steam, in a low pressure boiler, it's 125 degrees Celsius. Okay. We're burning natural gas. That burns at almost 2,000 degrees Celsius. Okay. So we're hitting the bottom of the pot with this 2,000 degree flame. And you're creating these flavor compounds that you can't create with steam. In particular, it's Maillard reactions. And then there's a bunch of other reactions that we didn't even anticipate, but we've kind of figured out are happening now, which are really, really cool. That's another hour on its own we could talk about. But, we're creating these Maillard reactions. And so Maillard reactions make stuff taste better. And this like from any food that you cook on a grill, right? If you cook it on a grill, you cook that same thing with steam. It wouldn't taste the same, right?
That's you could see boiled hamburger or boiled steak. Yeah, you could, it's not the same as
you could have a steak, throw it into a pot of boiling water and cook it effectively in a few minutes, but it's not going to taste the same, right? And my theory is this: is that look, we're the only species on the planet that's evolved to cook our food, right? And for millennia, how did we cook our food?
Flames.
Fire, right? That was the only tool we had. And so we have this species that's evolved over millennia to cook its food, only had one tool to do it. Shouldn't be a surprise that food that's cooked over fire tastes better. Right? And so that was our theory, right? And guess what?
It works.
It works, right? So and so that was where we went old school because it mattered. So everything we did, we tried to do for flavor, right? So we went new school to increase the concentration, and because we have more of that, less water in the pot, we have more of those reactions, right? Okay. The concentration of those reactions goes through the roof, and then it also reduces our energy consumption because now we're starting off with something that already has more alcohol in it, right? And then for our chilling system, we use the great outdoors. So Alberta is, it's cold. It's cold, right? And so we literally use the weather outside. We only make whiskey in the winter. It turns out, when I may or may not have been distilling in my dad's backyard, we found out that whiskey tastes better in the winter because it increases reflux. So our building isn't heated. We do it in the winter. And we figured, all right, it's minus 30 outside. Why don't we just send this cooling liquid outside to basically a giant,
heat exchanger is the idea.
Yeah, heat exchanger, car radiator is what it looks like. And just use the ambient temperature. So long as it's below 20 degrees Celsius, we can chill just using the ambient temperature.
Nice.
Right? And so that reduces our water consumption. But the cool thing that kind of sets the distillery apart is the fire. And so how we ended up getting the fire is really silly, right? And so I was thinking about this the other day, the timing. We broke ground. I knew we were going to use fire from the outset, but we broke ground, started building the distillery without having a solution in place, right? I had ordered the stills. The stills are handmade in Portugal because everybody in Canada refused to make equipment for me because they said it was stupid.
Well, and there's another spin-off, right? We started growing this industry. You've got the stuff. We've got an industrial complex second to none, building a ton of pressure vessels that go into big distilleries, which are called refineries. Yeah. So
ours don't hold any pressure. They're open to the environment. But the same manufacturers could easily make these things. Mine happen to be handmade in Portugal, and they're beautiful.
Oh, they're gorgeous.
But the fire was, it was important from a flavor standpoint. The question was, how the heck do we do it? Because nobody would do it for us. And I
love this part of the story. I'm sorry, I'm already starting to grin.
And so we didn't have a solution. So at this point, right before we figured out the solution, I was talking to engineers in BC who were going to then, they were going to design something, prototype it, and do all this stuff. And the challenge is that it has to be CSA approved. So where the heck do you find a CSA approved burner that's designed to burn natural gas in a high hazard location, right? And I'm like, well, one day it just clicked. I was like, well, where do we live, right? We live in Alberta. Like, we burn gas in dangerous places all the time, right? Like, when we pull oil out of the ground, methane comes with it. Yep. It's just natural gas. What do we do with it? We flare it off. We burn it.
We capture most of it. We do, honestly. We can't get that wrong for the record, because I'll have a ton of greenies just talking about our industry next. All that's captured. We don't flare like they do in other jurisdictions, but we do have the flare stacks.
Yes, we do. And so I was like, well, but like, where do they, when they do flare gas, where do they flare it? They flare it right next to a bomb, right next to an oil bomb.
Yeah, and that's the safety feature, right? Yeah. So folks that are, I'm going to be the politician a bit for the other industry too. So when folks are driving along and you see a site that's going to flare, something has gone wrong in that site. Mm-hmm. So what they do is they're dumping that volume of material, and the safest place to do is to burn it off at the end of those stacks. So we have these systems in place all over the place. And you're right, when you're pulling in a new well, you typically go to flare until you can cap it and utilize it. Mm-hmm. But that's the idea. You want something that snaps on quick, takes down that bomb potentially, and makes it inert at that point. And that's how we do it, by volume, and it's flaring. And
burning it cleanly is the new thing, right? And so old flare stack burners are terribly inefficient. You see the flame out of them that's orange. Yeah. That's not a good sign, right? These ones are beautiful, designed by an engineer who's actually originally from Ontario, but set up shop in Sundre. So one day the light bulb goes off. I'm like, I got to call some oil and gas guys here. And so I started calling around, and I find these guys in Sundre, and it just so happened that they answered the phone, right? it just so happened that they had like they had somebody from the UK answer the phone, and I said, hey, is there any chance you guys could take your flare stack burner and repurpose it to help us make whiskey? And as soon as I said whiskey, he was like 100%. Let me talk to the owner. We're gonna figure this out.
I love this.
We don't know how to do it.
We've never done it, but you're gonna make whiskey out of our flare stack. Yeah, we're in. Let's go figure it out.
So that was it. We basically took a flare stack burner and got them to repurpose it to help us make whiskey. And the first, it didn't work, of course, right? Like we took delivery of this thing at our grand opening. We opened 2 years ago.
Probably burned too cold.
No, well, I'll tell you. They basically gave me just a giant unmodified flare stack burner, and so it only had 3 nozzles. So we did the BTU calculation correctly. We had the right BTU, but the BTU is coming out basically in a 6-inch circle. Just a giant flamethrower is what they gave me. Yeah. And so everything immediately in the center of the still where the flame hit immediately burnt to a crisp. And then we proceeded to shoot flames through the walls, nearly burned the place down. And so that didn't work, as it turns out. And so my first 8 barrels of whiskey, I'll say they have a distinct kind of chocolatey note to them, because I may or may not have burnt some barley in the still, or at least the wort or the wash. But in any event, eventually after 4 redesigns, we got it to work actually shockingly well, and I made some tweaks of my own after the fact as well, that made it even more efficient. And again, I was talking to a company that does they replace all of the like the ceramic tiles and stuff in a lot of our oil and gas stuff. So it's Alliance Industries, and I happen to know a guy there, and we were talking about refractory stuff, right? And so he's like, hey, we have some stuff in the industry that we use to absorb heat and blah, blah, blah. And, eventually I tracked down this like fancy, it's again, oil and gas equipment paint that basically takes copper, which has a high emissivity rating, which means it reflects all of the infrared heat and energy, and turns it into a perfect black body, so that it absorbs energy out of the flue gases, so that we actually increased our efficiency by 25%.
No kidding.
By basically sucking heat out of the flue gases before they're exhausted.
That's
and
incredible.
Again,
that's awesome.
Yeah, and that was just like me in a hazmat suit with a spray gun, painting the stills and painting the ceramic fibers, and I learned again oil and gas tech, it increased our efficiency by like 25%. It was incredible. But,
that is awesome.
So
you get all this crazy, really cool stuff, and people in Alberta. I mean, that's part of it. Like, here, hold my beer is the old adage, right? Yeah, we can figure it out.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the make it happen province, right? So I like that you've got the home team now thinking of other things they can do. They're invested in this project too, because they want to see it succeed, which is really cool. And the relationships you have in the industries and you call around. So now you've got this thing set up, your system's working, you've got, which is really cool, you control it from home. So it's like a high-end pipeline system or refinery is basically what I'm seeing it from my end, from background experience. You have this little refinery kind of all set up. You're flashing off your product, but it takes a few years to make whiskey, right? So what were you doing in the interim? Like, how did you...
Gin. So that was that was one of the, after I proved to my wife that I was capable of making a decent whiskey, which may or may not have been made in my dad's backyard, right? She asked a good question. She's like, all right, fine, maybe you can make whiskey. How the heck are you going to make any money? And so that's, where, people coming and visiting the distillery, visiting our tasting room, enjoying our gin, and now our, this is not whiskey, which is our partially aged or unaged malt spirits that we produce.
So when does it become whiskey? When do you change the label? 5 years, 6 years, 10 years?
3 years it becomes whiskey, but it'll probably not be a finished product until, my guess is 4 to 5 years, until we're at a place where we're we can say, all right, this is it. So once it legally becomes whiskey, we'll probably change the label, but still mark it as like a work in progress. Because I think it'll kind of hit its prime based on what we're seeing so far. 5 years is about where it'll hit its prime, I think. But yeah, so
your gin is no slouch either. Like,
no,
I was really impressed to see the gold medals coming in on that. And then you can get it at Costco now too.
Yeah,
but the best bang for the buck is obviously to come to the distillery and get the experience, and it's also better price for you, and you actually get some margins on it, because a lot of this you're really tight on margins based on your industry. So we're working on that. And I'll tell you what, winning some gold medals really helps bring power to the cause too. So that helps.
Well, I mean, so the whiskey. So here's the thing: is everybody told us when we went, when we installed a flare stack burner at the distillery to heat our stills, everybody told us we're stupid, right? But let's look at the results. So the whiskey, for unaged spirit, has best in the world at the World Whiskey Awards. Turns out, I didn't realize this, I got the highest score in the world 2 years in a row prior to that at the International Wine and Spirits Competition. And I didn't realize that till I went to the UK to get my other award, and a judge ran into me. He's like, oh yeah, you won the other competition 2 years in a row. And I was like, what? Because they just give you a score out of 100. I didn't realize we got the highest score in the world. 2 years in a row. And then the gin, the Tempest, which is our flagship and original product, won Best Canadian London Dry Gin, got a gold medal, Best London Dry Style Gin in the country in 2022. And then this year, we haven't announced it yet, I haven't done a press release for it, but our Timeless just won Best Canadian Classic Gin. So everything that we have on the shelf is either the best in the country or best in the world. That's pretty cool.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
So what I didn't tell you, or I don't know that I have told you yet, I don't think so, sleep and sketchy things between politics and kids and what you're doing it's pretty similar. So a few hours of sleep here and there. But when we were having a may or may not have had a conversation about you heading over to London for some reason. So I'm itching to tell people about it. So I've got a very close group that we're kind of nudging and hedging. And once it was out, the cat was out of the bag when you're there, it hits the Edmonton Journal, and I get a call from the Premier going, is that the distillery in your backyard? Is that the one that we went to? So last summer I had the opportunity to bring the Premier around to a couple places, and we wrapped up at your place and graciously having us there because I wanted to showcase and have that. And when the Premier of the province that you reside in calls up, because she wasn't prompted on this, she saw a press release going, that's that distillery. Yeah. She was so impressed with what you've done. I mean, hopefully that resonates too with you and folks up there as well, because that's huge. Like, everyone's behind you.
That's awesome.
You're our team. It's like, obviously the Oilers winning the Stanley Cup. It's us.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So what was that experience like? And folks that don't know, and again, I'm one of those that don't know that level of distinction, but winning a gold medal at that caliber, like it's a world gold medal. Explain what that
is. So winning best in Canada, as I've discovered, to me now is no longer a big deal because I seem to do it every year. So so winning best in Canada is, is cool. You get a gold, and you have to get a gold. What's really cool about this competition is there's a lot of countries where, like, they don't even, their highest medal is a bronze, right? Like there's a lot of countries where their best showing is a bronze. So Canada has actually, and Alberta in particular, has been doing quite well at these awards. And so we've got some gold medals. So if you win best in your country, you automatically are nominated for world's best. So this year, there was only, for our category, which was new make spirit, which is what all we have is like our unaged stuff, right? Because our whiskey hasn't reached 3 years yet. So our category is new make and young spirit. So anything under 3 years in age. So we won best in Canada last year, and we won it again this year. And if you win best in the country, you're nominated for best in the world. So this year, I think there was 10 distilleries around the world. So we're up against, distilleries from, it was Scotland, and they're a well-funded, I know the distillery we were up against, well funded, and run by like 4 veterans of like the single malt industry.
Well, in like once you start getting there, and it just blows my mind how long they've been doing this. Like it's hundreds of years they've been running these. Like these are like it's Ford versus Ferrari, to put it in context. Like you're coming in this industry within, and it was only a couple of years, which is wild.
Crazy,
so you're coming in a couple of years with all this crazy stuff, and you're beating Ferrari basically.
And my equipment didn't work for the full 2 years that our distillery's been open, let's be clear. So, and so we're coming in late, and these guys are like, the Irish distiller we are up against, Colnakilty, they're awesome at what they do. They make awesome spirit. The English distillery we were up against, also great. The Japanese distillery that we were up against this year took best in the world last year, beat us out last year. And then there was an Italian distillery, and then I can't remember. And actually, sorry, there was a huge Israeli distillery that's, again, very well funded. A Taiwanese distillery that's very well funded, and a Chinese distillery that's huge. And then there's little old us. I think we were the only like really small craft player on that stage, and I'm sitting there in this ballroom, and you don't realize, not having ever been there before, I didn't realize the scale of this event. And it's because I sit down and I look to my left and I look to my right, and the person, to my left, he looks over, he's like, oh, I'm Gurpreet at Anohka Distillery. He's like, oh, cool. And he's like, oh, I'm Kevin from Middleton Distillery. And I was like, wait a second. This is like one of the biggest distilleries in the world. They just did a reno, and it was $100 million, right? And they put down 10,000 barrels of whiskey a week, right? They've got a test distillery that's bigger than my distillery.
That's wild. And
so I'm sitting next to the head distiller from Middleton, which, they make Jameson, they make, all the spot whiskeys, Redbreast. Like 80 to 90% of all Irish whiskey is made here.
No kidding.
And I'm sitting next to the master distiller, and and next to, on my right side was a person from Duncan Taylor, which is one of the most highly regarded independent bottlers in Scotland. And I'm just Gurpreet from Edmonton. It's like, what's going on here? So it was surreal being in that room. And it was even more surreal, winning. It was kind of crazy. And everybody was so incredibly gracious. That community of distillers I've never really been a part of it because I'm out here in Alberta doing my thing, but like everybody is just so wonderful and gracious. And, and even though we are just this small player, they didn't treat me as such.
That is so cool.
It's really cool.
Well, I think there's got to be, to think in the context, it's an artistic quality. It's not only the science, but there's an art to it.
Yep.
And if you're sitting at the table with those folks, they're going to recognize your level of proficiency. Like you've kind of burst into their room, but to understand they're that gracious, that is really neat to see. That is really neat to hear about.
Yeah. So Kevin at Irish Distillers, he gave me his cell number, invited me to Ireland, so I'm going to Ireland.
That is so cool.
I'm taking my wife on that trip.
Good.
Though.
Yeah, you should. You should know at those points.
Yeah.
We've kind of covered that off. You won the awards, then you're back here. You hit the Edmonton Journal. What's it been like since then? Are folks recognizing that the home team just brought home the gold?
It's been crazy. Like our whiskey isn't even ready yet. Like the bottle we have here, it's only been aged 14 months, and people want it, and I can barely keep up actually right now with the demand for that. Actually, we ran out of labels today. I had 1,000 labels a couple of weeks ago. I have no more labels.
That's really cool.
So I have to quickly reorder labels and do all the rest of it. But it's been, the feedback's been amazing, and it isn't restricted to Alberta. Like we have people from the East Coast to the West Coast calling us and saying, "Hey, how do we get our hands on this stuff?" Right? And no, it's been tremendous and really exciting. And I was worried, and other people in the industry who have been making whiskey for a while, they're like, "Fine, you're making whiskey, but like you're making a lot of whiskey. How the heck are you going to get rid of it?" And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, well, if this is any indication, I'm not going to have any issue selling this stuff when it's ready.
Yep.
So,
well, that's pretty inspiring. So, Gurpreet, thanks for doing this. Number one, the ask usually on these things is, okay, now as the MLA head, I put that on. What can I do? I know there's a couple policy things we need to get in. I want to grow this industry around with you, use you, and wave the flag. Obviously, that's part of it. What do you need out there? Because you've done it by sheer willpower, quite honestly, and doing that. What do we need to do to create an environment to allow more distillers and to wrap this industry to bring it up?
I think so. I think there's a couple of things. One is the obvious ask, which I mean you and I have already discussed. Is like right now my margin when I sell through, when I sell through the AGLC. My margin on our gin products, for example, or any of our whiskey products is essentially nothing, right? Like it gets all consumed by excise from the federal government, and then all of the fees through Liquor Connect through AGLC, the markups that we end up having to pay. There's really not much left for us, and that's any distiller. But I think I've been reflecting on this more and more. Since this award and seeing the response globally, because I'm the emails within Canada are interesting, but I'm getting emails from Taiwan and Japan cool. And people around the world want to get their hands on this stuff, because if it's the best in the world, then everybody wants it. And so I mean, I think I have an idea. And I don't know if it's something that's a real possibility, but there are a handful of awards, right, that actually mean something, because there's a ton of spirits awards. A lot of them don't mean much because you pay enough money and you get a medal, right? The World Whiskey Awards is one that means quite a lot. The International Wine and Spirits Competition means quite a lot. If you're exporting to the U.S., the San Francisco competition means quite a lot. Okay. So there's 3 that are important, and I think having the ability to. I want to send my stuff to Taiwan. There's people that are asking me, well, I can't afford a flight to go out there, right? I can't afford to go on a trade mission because I don't have the capital for it, because it's all tied up in product that has to sit and age for, 5 to 15 years, right? And I have to pay for all of the power, the electricity, the barrels, the grain, everything now.
Yeah, it's sunk cost. It's sitting there waiting.
It's sitting there, and 5 to 15 years.
And this isn't 400 years in where you've got your cash flow model all sorted out, right?
Yeah. So now, if I need to make what I think would be really interesting, and something that's probably an easier sell is, if there's an export grant program. So if a distillery shows promise, let's say you win best in the world at something, right?
That'd be a nice one to have as a benchmark,
Yeah, world's best. If you win world's best, there should be a grant program that helps that distillery get to market in those jurisdictions. And so, whether I guess the issue is when government is doing this type of thing, you don't want to pick winners and losers, right? And so it's not really fair to do it. But if we're talking about export, there are certain awards that actually have export value and meaning. And so you identify what those awards are, and if distillers are having success, and you can define the success, right? If you win best in Canada, here's a grant. If you win best in the world, here's another grant, right? I won both, so 2 grants. No, I'm kidding. But and then tie that to some sort of export program where you basically get a grant so that you can actually go and make those trade connections, because none of that stuff is easy, right? It's all, again, upfront capital, and it costs a lot of money to travel, build those connections, and for example, Japan, you will probably end up having to make 3 to 4 trips to Japan to solidify the relationships with the buyers on the other side before they actually purchase anything from you. And that is not inexpensive.
Well, and I'm thinking here there's an opportunity. We have foreign trade offices through Jobs, Economy and Trade. Yes. We have those. Through the Agriculture Ministry, we have those foreign trade offices as well. So when you and I were talking before about trying to tie in the education component of it, you look at the ag side of it, and you look in the trade offices, I think there's opportunities to do that. The other one that I believe is it's pretty difficult for folks to be that entrepreneurial without having the cash outlay. And if you win a gold, okay, then I'll recognize you. It's kind of like Canadian Olympic teams. Honestly, it's the athletes no one knows who the heck they are until they're on the stage somewhere. I believe that we need to look at, similar to what we did in the craft brewing market, we need to look at that with the distilleries and give you guys some breathing space, because the excise taxes and everything else that handles on the big ones, they're based already in a well-established bulk distillers. So we need to give that space there too. And then the other one too is with those trade missions, maybe there's some joint skin in the game when you do that. We're going to be hitting a ton of different world stage conferences and all those things. And I would love to be able to have a number of distillers with us saying, here's our diversification, here's what we're doing, here's Alberta. It's more than just, bulking out the best beef in the world and bulking out the barley and selling it to you and bulking out the energy you need. Here's all the other things we're doing with it. So I think there's opportunities for that. You and I are going to have to go offline, and with your other friends, we're going to figure it out. It's way easier now that I can do that with the gold medal, obviously, because now people see that it's achievable. It always takes the first one to shoot to the moon and land. The other thing that I want to share with you too is that you were over in London winning your award, hobnobbing with the best, which is way cool. You guys graciously came to an event that we had, and through the Council of State Governments, we literally had senators and representatives up from the U.S. touring. You guys had a little stand there, and one of the feathers in the hat was the foreign dignitaries sampling your product. But I literally, we purchased some of those and said, here is Alberta's gold winning, So they
cool.
took that back with them, Gurpreet, and I can't tell you how much that means, not only to be able to be your MLA and do that, but as hosting these folks to say, here's Alberta. They literally are going to take that home with them. So your message is being spread all over the place.
That's awesome. All right. Well,
so what am I looking for here for notes? It's kind of like
I don't know. The tasting notes from the competition were interesting. They're like, they actually, I think bicycle tire rubber was one of the tasting notes, but
bicycle tire rubber.
Yeah. So, what I taste and what you taste might be two different things. But
I've never been eating bicycle tires. So who's the guy that came up with that one? You got to look at the guys who like Animal off the Muppets or what?
Yeah. But so she's 55%. So I'd
use sparingly.
Yeah. I gotta give you a little bit more there. There we go.
Okay.
So what is really cool about this stuff is, so because we have fire, so the real interesting flavors in whiskey are esters. And esters are they're responsible for a lot of like fruit flavors and a lot of like really cool, they will commercially produce esters, to flavor candies and stuff like that. So, and ester is naturally created by yeast. And what it is a fatty acid and an alcohol together. Right?
Okay.
And depends on, which fatty acid and which alcohol gives you different flavors. And so what we discovered is our yeast strain, like I was saying, that concentration of flavor, we produce a ton of these esters. But then we hit it with this giant fire. And what it does is it tears the esters apart. And so now you have a bunch of free acids and a bunch of free alcohol, right? And so we designed our first stills to capture this acid, the fatty acids, to capture as much of it as we possibly could. Then we go to our second distillation, and again, huge fire underneath this pot, and now you have this giant reaction chamber that's full of these acids and alcohols, and now they're recombining. But they're recombining in a way that they didn't during fermentation. And so now different fatty acids are combining with different alcohols, and we create an entirely different flavor profile of all these like really cool fruits that nobody's ever tasted in whiskey this young before. And it blew people's minds. So when I was pouring this for people in the UK, they were like they were comparing it to whiskeys that are produced by large, like by Louis Vuitton, like Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, right? Like they own Ardbeg. They were comparing this to, Ardbeg, Wee Beastie, or Cora Veteran. So like, these products that are being produced by these mammoths and finished products on the shelf. This is 14 months old, right? And at the time when I was in the UK, the bottle I had taken was actually only 13 months old. So this is about a month older than what I had taken to them.
So does it? It has to age fully in the barrel or in the bottle? Okay,
yeah,
once bottle.
I mean, it does change in the bottle, but not in a significant way.
Okay.
Not in the way that it does in the barrel, because the barrel, is a porous vessel.
Yeah.
It's oak breathes, and so we actually have a huge evaporative loss problem right now. So we lose a ton to evaporation, and it ends up changing way more rapidly in a barrel than it does once it's bottled. But
and you were talking about the humidity and where you store the barrel and all that type of stuff too.
Has a huge impact as well. And so, and it was really cool because I got a chance to talk to these master distillers from the biggest distilleries in the world and get their feedback on all my crazy ideas that I have. And so we built a aging warehouse adjacent to we have like a section of wetland on the property, and so the water from that wetland drains through this area of the farm, and so we put our storage building right in the path of this drainage, and so it's about if we took where our building is and we dig 8 feet down, it's just standing water, literally just 8 feet down, right? And so the idea was to build a high humidity environment so that we could mature the whiskey in a different environment than what is typical in Alberta, and so far so good. It's like I was down there the other day, and it's 76% humidity, whereas anywhere else on the farm is like close to zero.
Yeah,
and that was pretty cool.
So what does the humidity do for the aging process? Just less evaporation? Or
no, it changes what leaves the barrel. So it actually, what the problem that we have is that there's some volatile components that kind of mess with the mouthfeel of the whiskey. And when I'm talking about this, I'm being really picky. Right?
Yeah.
Like I think the mouthfeel of our whiskey, most people would have this and say it's amazing. I think there's some improvement that could be had here. Okay. We could make it just a touch better. And we can do that with humidity, because if you have humidity, it changes the way the vapors in the barrel evaporate. Usually, in a dry environment, what ends up happening is it's mostly water that leaves the barrel, so the alcohol strength goes up.
Yep.
So this barrel, I've filled it at 61.3%, and it's sitting at like 65 already, 14 months later.
Very
so it's
cool.
Lost water.
Very cool.
Right? The alcohol has stayed in the water.
Yep.
But there's an advantage to going to a humid environment where you actually lose alcohol, because in that environment, a lot of those volatiles that mess with the mouthfeel, they'll actually leave sooner. And it changes the way the spirit interacts with the oak and a bunch of other things. But I mean, I don't know. Everything I do is kind of a gamble, so we'll find out. Talk to me in like 5 years, and I'll tell. And either this was an amazing idea or a terrible idea.
Well, so far, when it sounds like your hunches are pretty spot on. So
far, we've been lucky. Yeah,
go for it.
Lucky. I got to touch wood here. So,
all right. So what I hear from the real Scotch drinkers, you got to put like 3 ice cubes in this.
Well, I mean,
not a chance. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I did hear that some people would talk about putting a single drop of water just to break the surface tension. Those things, or
well, I mean, water does a couple of things. It'll actually create an exothermic reaction, and it'll change what's in the headspace. I think this is where it ought to be. I wouldn't add water to it if I were you. Because it's 55%.
Well, again, I'm newbie, right? Like I hear stuff. So it's like the YouTube stuff. So I'm doing this so I dispel all the whisks.
For some whiskeys, it's fine. For this one, I'd leave it because it's fairly young. If you add water to it, it actually all of a sudden takes on a very aggressive kind of mouthfeel. So I wouldn't add water to this. But when you do have it, what I encourage you to do is take a very small sip and then hold on to it in your mouth for like 5 or 6 seconds, and kind of let.
So just let it trickle down your throat.
I would chew it for like 5 or 6 seconds, and then it kind of opens up on your palate as you're having it, and you get because it's incredibly dense. Like the flavors here are incredibly dense, and I think that's one of the things that sets us apart is just how there's just so much going on. And so what ends up happening is you hold it for 5 or 6 seconds, or you kind of move it around the mouth, you actually start to salivate, and it brings the ABV down a little bit, and that addition of water is kind of happening all in situ.
This is terrible. I'm starting to salivate now. Just
right. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, the Bosch.
I love this stuff.
That's nice.
Yeah.
That's really nice.
That's only 14 months old, so.
My friend who went to Scotland the first time, this is funny, we're down on a job site, and a friend of mine, actually, a mentor, he says, you got to try Scotch. And I was in my 20s. Mm-hmm. I tried Scotch, and it was terrible. He says, you got to wait until you're at least in your 30s before the palate changes. So that was one of them. So at least I got into my 30s before I had this. But my friend of mine, he whips over, his sister was getting married in Scotland. He comes back and he brings back all these bottles of Scotch, and he paid a whack load of cash for them. Yep. We're sitting down and we're trying them, and I'm like, I can spend $30 for a thing of rye. It tastes better than this. Folks, this is not that. This is very nice.
Yeah.
I can't tell you all the distinct flavors and everything else, but this is like elixir of the gods. This is just a nice, I guess, heat to it, and it's not offensive. And I found that I do like Highland Scotches better than the lowland ones. I'm not sure where you would put this on that, Gurpreet, but
it's more like
it's kind of in between.
Island style, actually. Yeah.
So what does that mean if it's an island style? What's
just usually a little bit more smoky, peaty.
Yeah.
More kind of oomph.
Oh, this is nice.
Anyways, this is my pride and joy.
With
aside
peat,
from my 3 kids, of course.
Yeah, right on. with the peat and the smoking, that was another thing we were talking about. We've got tons of peat.
We have tons of peat. We have more peat than Scotland. We have more peat than almost anybody. Right?
There's another thing we can start doing, right?
Exactly,
Is actually smoking
100%. So I'm working with a welder right now on a prototype, because it turns out when Alberta Transportation had to replace the culvert on our property, going underneath Highway 16, they had to dig a whole bunch on our property to kind of. We have a creek that goes through there, and they had to basically create this diversion area for the creek while they were replacing the culvert. And so they dug a bunch up. And so as soon as I saw them digging, I went down there and started playing in the dirt. And lo and behold, it's just full of peat down there. And so I have 20 acres of peat on my own farm. And so they've already excavated this peat up. They may or may not have bagged a bunch of it for me, and I might have 8 tons of peat that was harvested off our own farm, and we're working with a welder now to kind of design a system where I can peat my own whiskey.
That is cool.
So I've got a prototype. I always have ideas in my head. Whether it'll work or not is another question. And this could be the first time I made whiskey, right? But then you tweak it, you figure out what you did wrong, and take it from there. But
and we've got the trades obviously, but the technical prowess as well, and different processes that could be utilized or potentially for that. We were looking at the aviation industry, and it was the same thing, the industrial complex and the skills we have in the engineering, 80% transferable. Now we've got water bombers being built in Alberta. Who would have thought?
Do we actually?
De Havilland moved out here.
That's really cool.
Yes, we literally are building water bombers now here because of those transferable skill sets. So this is lovely.
Yeah, so the day I figure out how to peat my own barley and smoke it with my own peat moss, that's the. I think that's the.
We'll talk about value add on your farm. You've got all of this stuff,
exactly.
right? It's all the farmers out there.
Yeah.
I would love to be able to grow this industry, help you out doing that, and get a bunch of Albertans doing this.
And that's the thing. It's I'm not shy to share what I know with anybody that's willing to come and talk to me. And so I'm actually trying to, the neighbors that that farm our property, that own the combines, that seed and harvest on our property, I've offered to basically help them set up a distillery, because they farm 3,000 acres, so they have no shortage of grain. They have all the grain literally at their disposal. And I said, and they've got 3 or 4 months a year where they're not doing very much, except building shops, except building shops and doing everything else. They'll tell you they're always busy, but they've got a period of time where they've got some downtime, and I'm trying to convince them to take the plunge here. And I was like, listen, I'll teach you guys how to make whiskey. I'll do everything. And then, we take that little corner, Carville Corner, and turn it into like, this whiskey destination. I think that would be really cool.
I think that would be really cool. And especially when it's stone's throw from the city.
Exactly.
And then the other concept I tell folks, these little micro corridors, and I keep going on about that, it's almost like the Disneyland ride. Mm-hmm. So Disneyland, I think Mickey Mouse and Tony Soprano are the same individual. Like they're both gangsters. They take your cash, but somehow you like them and you keep going back. So every time you go to Disney, have you been to Disneyland?
The one in California, yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, when I was a kid. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So you go on the ride, you get out of the ride, you're all pumped up, and then you walk right through the gift shop. And then the gift shop, you're compelled because you've had this experience to buy something. And then the gift shop points you to the next ride to go to the next ride to get the next gift shop. Yeah. If we did that with the concept around the area, so we're going, looking at wine and cheese and your, type idea. If you've got the best beef there, you go for the whiskey tour. It's all within stone's throw of a 1.2 million plus population with an international airport.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
on the way to Jasper.
On the way to Jasper, right, to, go catch up there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is phenomenal. And I spent, now looking back, same thing, on the engineering side and the energy side, dining clients and, bottles of gratuity here and there. Mm-hmm. A couple $100 to $300 for bottles of scotch. What does this go for in comparison?
$52.
Jeez. Louise. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, like my buddy Scott out there, he spent a lot more money on bottles of scotch that tasted no better than a $30 bottle of rye whiskey. This is incredible.
Yeah. Some might even say it's, world's best, but, yeah, it's.
I'll let others be the judge of that.
Yeah. It's pretty.
and they have.
It's just been, it's been really cool, to kind of, have this idea. And then I did not expect to win this award. Well, like when they called me to come out for the award, I was like, listen, it's very like, best in Canada. That's great. I mean, I was nominated for best in the world last year. I don't know. Does it really make sense for me to come? And he's like, well, I think you'll be happy with the results this year. And I had a 2 month, and I told the guy, I was like, look, I have a 2-month-old, right? I'm trying to make whiskey right now. I can't really, and I have no money. Right? I can't really.
You throw everything into your pride and joy to get this going.
I can't really afford to come out there. But he's like, listen, you just make your way out here. He never actually told me whether we won or not, but he said, just make your way out here. I'll make sure that you have that it's a wonderful experience for you, and it turns out he didn't lie.
That is so cool.
Wonderful experience. Yep.
Well, again, this is what's it like to be a rock star?
It just like, you know what? For once, my 5-year-old daughter thinks I'm cool. She thought awesome. I was cool. She's like, you're not the world's best, Dad. And I was like, but here, look, it says so right here. And she's like, surely there's some other people out there that are better than you. and then I was on the news, and she watched the news. She's like, all right, that's pretty cool, Dad. And so,
yeah, that's pretty humbling. But and I've only met your wife there once out on location, but lovely family. Well done that you could do this. And obviously, we'll do whatever we can to get things sorted on our end to understand. And again, part of it too is we have been stuck in convention for a number of years of being really good at agriculture, really good at energy. This is diversification. It's fine. It's using those two industries to come together to do value add.
Exactly. I mean, we could be a powerhouse with what we have literally right under our feet, growing under our feet. We could be, I can't think of another area in the world where they have the potential to kind of dominate the way that we could here. And we have it all, right? And we're blessed to live where we live and have the resources that we have. I think, if things don't fall off the rails, I think that Alberta could be a powerhouse within 15, 20 years globally. But it takes, it takes a dedication to quality. I don't know how we make sure that everybody kind of adheres to similar kind of standards of quality.
Kind of like the Brewers Act or whatever they passed in the Bavarian Act for brewing.
Something like that. Yeah, but like if there's a way to to kind of like set standards, Alberta could become world renowned. And you know, every distiller that's out there, I can't imagine there's a single one of them that doesn't want to make the best damn spirit in the world.
Yeah.
Right. And
but it comes down to margins too. So if they have to bulk it out and sell the friggin' wine coolers or whatever they need, they're going to do that to keep the lights on. Exactly. So if we could find, I really like that idea of actually setting the standards of what it was, and then maybe that goes to that gold medal concept too. If you adhere to this program, here's where we're at, and then we give you other ways to keep the wolf at bay. Yeah. So we're very proud of you. We'll take a few things offline and do it. Any last closing remarks or parting remarks you can think of, or because the whole thing was, you know, what matters to you, and also to have good stories of and give people hope, honestly, entrepreneurial and everything else. What would you leave with any parting words for folks out there thinking of getting crazy enough to try what you're doing?
Honestly, like we have such amazing resources at our fingertips, and you know, I don't know, you know, historically this country is built on export, right, of raw ingredients, right, and we export them. Other people value add to them and sell them back to us. But I think honestly, it doesn't just apply to my industry. It applies to almost everything. We have this huge potential here. We have such a skilled workforce. We have everything we need right here. And I think, you know, when we're looking at the future of, you know, Alberta's economy or even Canada's economy, we have this potential to you know, make stuff here and make incredible stuff here. And, you know, just because historically it was made somewhere else doesn't mean, you know, we can't do it here and, you know, maybe even do it better. Right? Well,
and I like that hybrid model. Like you said, we're not bound by tradition because we're still young, but we're still mature enough to realize that tradition makes sense where you use it. So the combination of the two. So it's kind of like that kid going, well, why not? I'm 5 years old. It's the Leonardo da Vinci thing. You know, think like a 5-year-old for an hour a day. You can move the needle. So I really like that. So then the budding entrepreneurs out there, would definitely talk to your MLA. Not just me. If you're in a different area and region, I've got a lot of like-minded colleagues. And what we honestly want to do is to make sure that folks know that they can do things and it happens. And I'm going to share one other thing with you on the Canadian cultural side. I was at Spruce Meadows. I was invited to an event down there, put on British Days, and which is kind of wild for me as a farm kid, you know, doing those type of things. I met the High Commissioner of England at the time, and the Consulate General said, "You got to meet this lady." And I thought, you know, whatever, she'll talk to me for 5 minutes or 2 minutes, and there's all these other consulate generals, like important people, lined up to talk to her. And she spent probably 15 to 20 minutes with me and just absolutely engaged and energized about the things that we were talking about. And I was talking about that model again of connecting industries and growing things and like, what do you need? And she goes, you know, she says, I've been all over Canada, all over the world, but especially over Canada. When I come to Alberta, she says, I feel like anything can happen, that we can do anything. Like, what do you need? What do we need to do? We want to capture on that energy. So what you've done here, I hope that gives that message to other people. Anything can happen here if you just get after it and talk to the right people and take that risk. And there's tons of people on the other end that have that same culture. Yeah, you need a burner to make whiskey. We're in.
Yeah, exactly.
Really cool. So thank you so very much for your time.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Let go. Waking up the buzzard on an old black county road. We're just